Welcome to another episode of Developing Impactful Coaches in Canada, where we dive deep into the world of coach development. In this episode, host Mark Dagenet chats with Dr. Wade Gilbert, renowned sports scientist, coach educator, and author. Join us as we explore Wade's journey into coaching and coach education, the bridging of academic research with real-world application, and the development of coaches as lifelong learners.
Hi, Wade. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Mark.
So thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast. I'm very excited to have you on, especially with the amount of work in coach education that you do in research and applications. So I'm looking forward to pick your brain on a few topics.
Happy to engage in the conversation and be part. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and inviting me on the show.
Well, let's jump right into it. But first of all, can you tell us how you came to become someone that does a lot of coach education research and how you became a pioneer, high-level researcher in the field?
Well, timing is everything. I was able to be at the right place at the right time, honestly. I always had an interest in sport, and growing up in Canada, playing multiple sports, not good enough to make a living and retire on an athlete contract. Decided to spend more time learning about sport and performance and coaching, and then was fortunate to end up at the University of Ottawa, where there was a really good emerging group of faculty members and graduate students working in the space of broadly in sport, performance, coaching, coach development, and was able to connect with Dr. Pierre Trudel, who truly is a pioneer in this space, and learn with and from him and other people like Jean Coté and Gordon Bloom and Diane Culver and Penny Werther. Like there's a lot of really good energy and good people around that time. So it allowed me to really lean into that kind of emerging field of coach development. And then from there, I just followed the path, with the emergence of the field. I think, with journals being created, organizations being created, more jobs, more opportunities, more recognition, I think, in terms around the world, in terms of the need to provide education and development opportunities for coaches.
Now you've been at Fresno State as a professor for quite a few years.
This is my 25th year. Yeah.
Time does fly by.
Yeah, it was never by design or some grand plan. Like most things in life, by the time you get that far down the road, you look back and kind of wonder, how did I end up here? But it's been a good opportunity and a good place to work with good people in this environment. Has allowed me to stay connected to the field and continue to have one foot in academia and one foot in the field. So I've been called a pracademic, which I'll gladly take that. So it's allowed me to work in a space where I can stay connected to science and research, but I also am working with coaches and coach developers pretty much every day.
And a lot of your research spans around effective coaching practices, athlete development, creating positive team cultures. And you recently published a book called Coaching Better Every Season. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the book is about? What are the lessons that someone should know about, and why you felt this was the right time to write such a great book?
Oh, thank you. So I was asked to write this book several years ago, and the idea was to provide a space for that, again, that bridge between research and practice, because what I found working in this space, there was a lot of science on coach development, coaching, coach learning, and then research around that topic. And there's also a lot of information from coaches about coaching, so biographies, autobiographies, documentaries, things like that. But I hadn't really found a resource that combined the two. So when I work with coaches and coach developers, and I feel it's important for our work to be informed by science, but not limited by science, but informed by science and practice. So there's strengths and weaknesses to both of those components, in my opinion, because they each tell part of the story. And I think we're stronger and we can add more value to the people we work with and the organizations we work with if we can speak both languages and we can at least have awareness. So you know what it's like to compete. You know what it's like to be a coach, or what coaches' daily lives are like and their struggles and their needs. And you also are aware of literature and science, not only in coaching and coach development, but in human development and education and psychology and organizational development, as broad as possible, so that you can bring to bear to your work with coaches and coach developers the opportunities that maybe serving more as kind of a catalyst. So my goal was never to write a book to present it to the world as the answer to these topics. I'm just passing through like everyone else, trying to learn. But I felt that there was a missing piece at the moment in terms of bridging that gap between science and practice, to help people maybe have more informed conversations around these topics. Again, not present this as the answer or the final word, but what I found is, the typical coach or coach developer is not necessarily going to have the time or the interest in reading all the things I've read over the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. So I thought if I could somehow package that in a way that is digestible for most people, it might serve to help them stimulate some additional reflection on how they coach, why they coach, how they can become better as a coach. And that's why we deliberately chose the title Coaching Better Every Season. Really wanted to emphasize coaching, number one, becoming better as a coach, so coaching better, and continuous improvement. So that's why it's every season, coaching better every season. So great coaches are great learners. They want to learn. They want to get better. And so our work in this space and as coach developers, I think more and more is less about teaching them how to coach or content, and more about teaching them how to learn, so that they can continually develop and learn, and they aren't dependent on a course or a program or a certification. I mean, that's all part of their development. Mm-hmm. So that's how the book came to be. A publisher asked me if I'd be willing to do something like that, and foolishly I thought I could do that in maybe 6 months. I had a sabbatical coming up, and I said, "Oh yeah, 6 months should be plenty of time. I've been doing this for decades," and it took 3 years, and at that point, 3 years of still writing and learning and changing things, and the publisher said, "Enough's enough. We're going to publish the book." And what I've found since writing this book is that the more I've been asked to present and teach and deliver workshops and whatnot as the expert on this topic, the more I've learned through this process, the less confident I am in teaching it, because if nothing else, I've learned how much I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And that leads me, given you do coach education and research and anything related to it, how do you explain, and it might not be only in this field, but how do you explain the high level of research that comes out, the quality stuff, the quality findings that we have, but then a lot of it takes a lot of time to make its way to what I would call the mainstream coach education program and the people that actually could benefit from it?
Well, now having lived in both spaces for decades, there's a natural tension there, because when you work in academia and you conduct research, particularly if it's funded research, typically the mandate is not to create material or information that's going to be consumable or consumed by coaches or coach developers. It's the currency in that space generally is academic publications and journals that other academics read, or handbooks, and there's a place for that, and that's important. But it's not work being done for coaches or coach developers. It's work being done for other academics. Now, I've seen more people trying to bridge that gap and make efforts to translate, if you will, their science. So if you take a typical academic journal, no coach would ever read that. I mean, some people will argue, say, "Oh, I know a coach who reads journals," but generally, it's a different language for a different audience. It's not written for a practitioner, and no practitioners would even know that exists. And even if they did, they probably wouldn't want to read it or wouldn't understand how to read it, and because it's a different language. It's the language of science, and so you have that lane in a way. And then you have the practice lane. So people who are coaching and coach developers, people who are working in the field. And I've always noticed there's a gap there. There's a tension there. And I've always tried to work in that space in between. And so I think they both do and can inform each other. And we would want to be able to pull from both spaces to have, again, this idea of better conversations, like more informed conversations, richer conversations. So a big role for coach developers is the coaches that you work with or the organizations that you work with don't have to know everything you know. They don't have to know about these theories and these models and this literature. You do, they don't. So you should be in that space as well, at least as a consumer, being aware of that, staying current, so that you can make informed decisions in that context with that particular group of coaches or that organizations, what might be relevant. So when I work with groups, a lot of the work I do now is across organizations. So it might be with a school district or a school or a college or an NGB, and we're working across multiple sports often. So what I found people really appreciate is when I can bring in, when relevant, literature or research that I think can help facilitate conversations and things they're trying to deal with in their environment. I'm not sending them research papers. They're not going to read that. I'm reading those papers, and I'm trying to make sense of how that might translate or be useful to help them reflect on the things they're doing. I mean, this other people may argue otherwise, but this is what I see working in both spaces.
Interesting. Now, there's so many questions I have, but I really want to ask this one. In your opinion, based on your research, based on your work over the years, what are the most critical components of an effective coach education program?
A coach education program?
Yeah.
I would say there needs to be a common language. So we need to have a shared mental model or understanding of some common principles. So if the goal here is to become a better coach, let's start with that. What does that mean? What does better mean to you? What does a good coach mean to you? And that's where I spend a lot of time. I was the author of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Quality Coaching Framework, co-authored the integrated definition of quality coaching or coaching effectiveness with Jean Coté. I've been involved in handbooks. So I've spent, again, not intentionally, it just kind of happened that way, but spent a lot of my career trying to help create the language of quality coaching. So it doesn't matter if you're in Singapore or Canada or Australia or rugby or tennis or soccer. We can speak the same language, and language is culture. I've often been asked to do things around team culture, and for me, it starts with language. Can you communicate? And so if I say elephant and you say elephant, we both have the same picture in our mind. You're not thinking about a fish and I'm thinking about a bird. We both agree what an elephant is. So what is good? What is good coaching? What is quality coaching? development? What are athlete outcomes? So start with language, create a shared language, a common language, and then you can customize that to your particular context and your culture. So, if I do something in Japan, the way we talk about quality coaching, I think, like with the International Council for Coaching Excellence and their frameworks, the International Sport Coaching Framework and Coach Developer Framework, that's been happening over the last couple of decades, where you do have frameworks now, both sport specific, regional, global frameworks that are available if people want to, look into that and use those frameworks, where we can have shared language around what is better. So that would be something that I'd say should be paramount to developing or revising or improving a coach education platform or program, is having a shared language, a shared framework on what we mean by becoming a better coach or better coaching.
So based on that, what would you say coach developer training should emphasize in order to be able to influence better coach education outcomes? So what programs that train coach developers should include? What should be trained in? If you had limited time, what would you emphasize in terms of what should coach developer go through in terms of becoming influential coach developers?
Being familiar with those quality coaching frameworks, for sure. So learning the language and going deep on the language, so that you overlearn it in a sense, because when you're trying to teach other people the language, you need to know it deeper than they may ever care to learn. So going deep with the language of quality coaching, being as broad or eclectic or diverse, multidisciplinary. So you should be, in my opinion, you should be value added to that organization or that group of coaches, so that you can bring perspectives that they don't have into the conversations, because typically they're going to be highly immersed in their domain. Softball coaching, right? That they know a lot about softball. They know a lot about softball coaching. They played softball. But you should be able to be much broader, and not just in coaching, but read in psychology and education and business, and be part of networks outside of your job. So be connected. And now that's quite common since COVID. There's lots of opportunities to be part of communities of practice, not just in coaching or coach development, but outside of that. I've been involved in a nonprofit for 15 years now called the Center for Sports Transformation here in the United States, that we've created. And it includes lawyers, surgeons, pilots, university presidents, college coaches. So when we have conversations, it's all over the place. But then you start to see the common patterns, right? To me, like this, we use this term best practices. I almost think we should eliminate that term. It's the best principles. What are the principles that should guide the practices? We have best principles, we know. And you see that when you get outside of your lane and you have a conversation with someone in medicine, and you're both talking about the same thing, but you're using different language because they read different books than you and they have different terms in their field than you, but it's the same thing. We just never talk to each other. So when you say, oh, well, you call it that in your field, we call it this. Yeah, same thing. So there's principles. So I think you, as a coach developer, the more eclectic you are in terms of the information you digest, the podcasts you listen to, the things you read, the more value you can add as a catalyst for reflection and better conversations with the people you work with.
It's quite interesting. So what are some of the most effective coach learning methods that you think will have a lasting effect on practitioners, coaches in the field? What seems to work the best in terms of coaching or coaches learning more about how to be a better coach?
Well, I was fortunate enough to, when I was working with Pierre Trudel at the University of Ottawa, I did my PhD in adult learning, principles of adult learning, and that's who we're dealing with. We're dealing with adults. We're not training kids. We're not even, I don't necessarily like the term training, but educating, developing adults. So there's principles of adult learning, and one of the basic principles is they have a history, they have a biography, they have wisdom, they have knowledge. And so I'd say acknowledge the wisdom that they bring to the partnership. Don't talk at them, don't tell them. As much as possible, start with meet them where they are. What are the things that are bothering you, that are troubling you, that you want to learn about, that you're dealing with right now? And then you find common space. It's almost like a needs assessment. I could go in and teach you a bunch of modules, but maybe you don't care and you don't need them, or you already know that. So it's good to have those modules and have that content in your back pocket, or available on your platform. But there should be, I've worked with some organizations where I haven't really seen it done well yet, but I'm sure people are doing it. But to create, there needs to be some kind of gateway into the profession. So you need to, in a sense, earn the privilege of having us follow your lead, but there needs to be some gateway, whether that's Safe Sport or, some combination of intro to coaching or something. So once you have a bit of a foundation, then it should really open up to letting them guide the learning. Where do they want to go? And this is what Pierre Trudel has written a lot about and has really been a groundbreaker in my opinion, is connecting adult learning and coach development to broader theories and literature around self-directed learning and communities of practice and learning communities and appreciative inquiry and different fields of learning that typically in coaching we wouldn't even think to look at.
Now, you're from Canada. You've been working at Fresno State in the US for quite a while, but you're also familiar with the Canadian coach education system. So, in your opinion, what are the strengths and opportunities of the Canadian coach education system based on what you've observed both in Canada and abroad in the US in terms of what's being done?
Yeah, Canada has always been a leading force in coach development, and going all the way back to the original NCCP in I think the 1970s, early 1970s. So one of the benefits I see is that there has been historically, there's federal funding, there's money put into that, and people will argue that they need more money or more resources, but you have money and resources that doesn't exist in most other countries. Some countries for sure, but so you do have people dedicated to working in this space who are being compensated. There are resources, there is funding for that. There is research that, most of the research, in my experience, English language research at least, and French, you could argue French and English language research, although there's, a good amount coming out of places like Belgium and France. But much of the research on coach development in the world is coming out of Canada. Now there's, Australia, England, France, they also are active, but much of it comes out of Canada, or has come and is coming out of Canada. And so there's research funding, there's people in university positions who work specifically in coach development and coach education. Like that's rare. I think if you're in Canada, that's normal. But you travel around the world and you say, oh, that is not normal. So you do have that critical mass of expertise, interest, funding that has been there for decades, that is really shaping the world, the world's views and approaches to coach development. So that to me is a great strength.
And where do you see coach education evolving over the next decade or so? Where is it going? How it's going to look like based on what you see out there, what the needs are, and what research is showing?
Well, you look at who our coaches will become. Who's the next generation of coaches? How are they being educated, and what's their environment look like? And that's the on-demand generation, where they don't want to sit through an 8-hour course and listen to things they might need. They're going to be more, I think, more forceful in telling us what they need. And we have to be ready to be able to either provide them with what they need or know where to get it. So I see maybe part of our role shifting from being the traditional content deliverer to maybe more of a learning shepherd. So almost like a Sherpa. So they're at the base of the mountain. They want to get to the top of the mountain. We don't have to know everything they want to know. We can't. But we can help guide them up the mountain and help be a part of that learning process. But we're not going to be the one giving them everything they need. But we could be part of that, and or connect, like a connector, so we can connect them. I don't know, or our organization doesn't know the answer to that. We don't have that, but I know who does, and I can connect you to them. So being that that source that can help them get to where they want to get by connecting them to resources and people and opportunities and courses. And one of the things that I've noticed with this group that I'm working with in the United States called the Center for Sports Transformation is that in the US, there is no federal oversight of sport. There is no federal, we don't have the same kind of resources that you'd have in Canada for coaching and coach development. So that void has been filled by lots of different people and organizations. And so what we're trying to do with our organization is not add another curriculum, another certification, another way. We want to help clients, which are our coaches or organizations, get access. We make sense of what's out there, so we can vet it. So the average coach or someone, an administrator, athletic director, somebody, they don't know where to begin. And if they Google something or go online and search for them, they get a million hits. I don't know where to start. Is this good? Is this good? But someone should know. So I think that's maybe more and more the role of a good coach developer, is being someone who can vet that information that's available to us around the world, and be able to kind of guide those coaches and those groups that, there's a lot on this topic, but read this paper or go to this website. This one is good. This one's been vetted. This one aligns well with our frameworks and the kind of approach we want to take. So I see more and more that kind of role. In addition to, being able to design curriculum and deliver curriculum, that's important. And then also, one other thing I'll add to that, Mark, is that we've experimented here with our U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. We created another program that's really in the field. And I know they do this in Canada too, and some other countries, where we're embedding coach developers in the field with the coaches. Now, it's hard to do that at scale, especially in youth sport, but with high performance sport, we're sending the coach developers to them to work with them. And I know Ireland is doing similar things, and certain sports are doing. So I see more of that happening.
This is quite fascinating. Now, the time does fly by, but I really want to ask you one last question, and maybe I have more questions for you down the road for another episode. So if you, Wade Gilbert, was asked to develop from scratch a coach education program for a Canadian national sport organization, they give you, a blank check in terms of content, structure, format, how would you go about it based on your experience and you think would be the best approach?
I would make sure that we have an entry level There needs to be, just think of like a house. There needs to be an entrance to the house. So the entrance has to be some introductory module to our language, the language of quality coaching and performance. And so that when you come into the house, we can start having shared conversations with shared understandings of our basic framework. Once you're in the house, we're going to show you the different rooms, and you tell us which room you want to go to and where you want to start. And then we'll either support you in those efforts to learn more about that room, or connect you with other people in our network who can serve that role. And to give you an example, Mark, another thing we tried with high performance coach, I know they're doing similar things in Canada, but we would bring cohorts of coaches, 12, 15 coaches across sports, to a site for a weekend, and we would bring people to that event to work with them. So it wasn't a conference with 1,000 people. It's, you have to want to be in the room in the first place. I'm not going to force you to learn. So you have to want to learn. And that's something that's really important to think about as well. Like, not everyone is ready to learn. Everyone becomes ready to learn at different points. So I'm not going to force you to want to learn something. That's a waste of your time and a waste of my time. So let's get people who are ready to learn. And so they're thirsty for the information, they're receptive to learning. Let's make it social. So there has to be some social learning component where we bring people together, whether it's virtual, in person, or some combination, so that they can learn together, so they can digest together, they can dialogue together, they can stretch and push each other, and you're teaching them how to learn. And then send them back out into the field with that information, and have either some mechanism in place where they're feeding back into our group, videos of themselves, or we have regular interactions to debrief, and then bring them together again at some point. And so I know, just from my experience, and there's all kinds of examples I'm sure that are going on that I'm not aware of, but just from my experience working with Olympic sports, that does happen in pockets, either with certain national governing bodies or even at the country level. Like Norway, for example, they win the medal count in the Winter Olympics, small country, 4 million people. How they do that? Or New Zealand, they punch above their weight. Everybody talks about that, small country. But they have mechanisms in place to regularly bring coaches, this is key, from different sports together to have shared conversations around performance. And so having coaches from other sports, across sports, is critical to really maximize learning, because then it challenges assumptions. Because if you just get together with a bunch of softball coaches, there's a lot of stuff you're not going to talk about, because everyone just assumes it's tacit knowledge. Nobody questions it. It's how we've always done it. It's just how you do it in softball. You get a bobsled coach in the room, they go, why you do practice? Why you do your warm up that way? And you're like, oh, well, because that's how we always do it. That's how I did it. That's how my coach did it. Yeah, but why? Wouldn't it be more effective to do it this way? Oh, never thought about it. And so it triggers deeper reflection.
Well, that's all the time we have. I have a million more questions, but I want to respect the time of our audience, which is 30 minutes, give or take. Wade, thank you so much for how generous you've been in providing great insights into coach education, coach developer training. It's very interesting, and perhaps we can have you in a future episodes. But again, I am very grateful, very appreciative of your time, and I'm sure our audience is as well.
Thank you, Mark, and hope I didn't go on too long in some of those responses, but yeah, definitely something I'm passionate about, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Developing Impactful Coaches in Canada. With over 30 years of coaching experience at all levels and a master's degree in coaching science, Mark has dedicated his career to unlocking the full potential of coaches and athletes alike. As a coach developer for 2 decades and the co-founder of Adrenaline Solutions, an agency focused on coach education and development, he's had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the transformative power of effective coaching. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit our website at adrenaline.solutions. From education and instructional design, sport development, marketing and communication, and web and AI automation, we do it all. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on Developing Impactful Coaches in Canada.